The October rain drummed against the windows of the penthouse suite at the Plaza Hotel, where Patricia Monroe stood in her $15,000 wedding gown, watching droplets race down the glass. The grand ballroom below was being transformed into a winter wonderland. White roses, crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, everything her future mother-in-law, Victoria Ashford, had insisted upon. Patricia's hands trembled as she adjusted the delicate lace sleeves, not from nerves about the ceremony, but from the weight of what she'd discovered just hours earlier. Manhattan's elite would arrive in 90 minutes, 200 guests who represented the pinnacle of New York society. Patricia had spent the past year learning their names, their preferences, their unspoken hierarchies. She'd transformed herself from a middle-class marketing consultant into someone worthy of John Ashford III, or so she'd believed. The transformation had required etiquette lessons, a new wardrobe, even changing how she spoke. Victoria had supervised every detail, her sharp blue eyes catching every misstep, every reminder that Patricia wasn't born into this world. The door opened behind her, and her best friend since college, Michelle, entered carrying a bottle of champagne. "You're getting married in an hour," Michelle said, her voice bright but her eyes concerned. She'd flown in from Chicago that morning, one of the few people from Patricia's previous life who'd been invited. Victoria had tried to exclude her, suggesting the guest list was already too large, but Patricia had fought that battle and won. Patricia turned from the window, and Michelle's smile faded. "What happened?" Michelle asked immediately, setting down the champagne. They'd known each other for 15 years, long enough to read every expression, every subtle shift in body language. Patricia reached for her phone, her fingers still shaking, and pulled up the email that had arrived at 6 that morning. The sender was anonymous, but the attachments were devastatingly clear. Bank statements, legal documents, and photographs. John had been funneling money from their joint accounts Patricia had contributed to from her own salary, into a separate investment portfolio. That alone would have been concerning, but the documents revealed something worse. Every contribution Patricia had made, every dollar from her marketing bonuses over the past 18 months, had been systematically moved and reinvested under John's name exclusively. Michelle scrolled through the files, her face darkening. "This can't be legal," she whispered. But it was. The prenuptial agreement Patricia had signed 6 months ago, the one Victoria's lawyers had presented as standard procedure for families of significant wealth, contained clauses that essentially gave John complete control over any assets Patricia brought into the marriage. She'd been so overwhelmed by the legal jargon, so eager to prove she wasn't marrying for money, that she'd signed without independent counsel. The photographs were worse. John and Victoria, seated in the elder Ashford's Fifth Avenue office 3 weeks ago, reviewing documents with their attorney. Patricia recognized the lawyer, Margaret Chen. The woman who'd smiled warmly while explaining the prenup was just a formality. In one image captured through the office's glass walls, Victoria was laughing, her hand on John's shoulder. The body language spoke volumes: conspiracy, satisfaction, control. "There's more," Patricia said quietly, pulling up the final attachment. It was a text message thread between John and his mother, discussing Patricia like she was a business acquisition. Victoria had written, "Once she signs everything after the wedding, we'll have complete control. She's contributing another $50,000 from her year-end bonus next month. The girl actually thinks she's building our future together." John's response had been a laughing emoji. Michelle looked up, fury and heartbreak warring on her face. "You have to cancel this," she said firmly. Outside, thunder rumbled across Manhattan, and Patricia could hear the orchestra below beginning their sound check. 200 guests, a $300,000 reception, and a marriage built on deception. Patricia walked to the mirror, studying her reflection in the designer gown Victoria had chosen, had paid for, had used as another subtle reminder of Patricia's dependence. For 18 months she'd endured the casual cruelties, Victoria's comments about her background, her family, her insufficient understanding of how their kind of people operated. She'd tolerated John's increasing dismissiveness, attributing it to wedding stress rather than recognizing it as contempt. "I'm not canceling," Patricia said finally, meeting Michelle's eyes in the mirror. Something had shifted in the past hour, crystallized by rain and revelation. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want, a perfect society wedding with all their important friends watching." She picked up her phone again, opening her contacts. "And then I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who they are." Michelle understood immediately. "What do you need?" she asked. Patricia's mind was already racing, calculating timing, impact, and irrevocable consequences. The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, and below the grand ballroom awaited its carefully orchestrated performance. But Patricia was done performing for the Ashfords. Now they would perform for her. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel gleamed with understated opulence as guests filed in beneath chandeliers that had witnessed a century of New York's most significant social events. Patricia stood in the anteroom, listening to the string quartet play Pachelbel's Canon, the same arrangement Victoria had insisted upon because it's what people of breeding expect. Through the partially open door, she could see the assembled crowd, CEOs, politicians, old money families whose names appeared on museum wings and hospital foundations. Victoria Ashford sat in the front row, resplendent in champagne silk, accepting congratulations from guests with the satisfied smile of someone who'd successfully defended her family's social position. Next to her, John's father, Charles, looked vaguely uncomfortable in his tuxedo, a man who preferred board meetings to social spectacles. John himself waited at the altar, handsome and confident, occasionally glancing at his watch as though this were just another appointment on his calendar. Patricia's father, Robert, appeared beside her, simple in his rented tuxedo, his weathered hands adjusting his tie nervously. He'd worked as a high school teacher for 35 years, and everything about this world unsettled him. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said softly, then hesitated. "But you don't look happy. We can leave right now. Just say the word." She squeezed his hand, touched by his perceptiveness. "I need to see this through, Dad," she replied. In her bouquet of white roses and stephanotis, she'd tucked her phone, set to record. Michelle was already in position, seated near the middle, her own phone discreetly ready. Everything Patricia had learned about timing and presentation in her marketing career was about to be tested. The music swelled into Wagner's bridal chorus, and Patricia began her walk down the aisle on her father's arm. Heads turned, guests murmured appreciation for the gown, the flowers, the bride herself. Victoria's smile widened. This was exactly the image she'd wanted, the perfect society wedding that would be featured in Town and Country magazine. John's expression remained neutral, almost bored, as Patricia approached. When she reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and whispered, "I love you," before stepping back. The officiant, a silver-haired Episcopal priest Victoria's family had used for generations, began the traditional ceremony. Patricia barely heard the opening words about love and commitment. Her mind focused on the precise moment when everything would shift. "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace," the priest intoned, the traditional words delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never actually been interrupted. In the audience, guests shifted slightly. This was always an awkward moment, though everyone knew it was purely ceremonial. Patricia turned to face the crowd. "I do," she said clearly. The priest blinked in confusion, and John's hand tightened on hers. Victoria's smile froze, her eyes widening in alarm. "I object to this marriage," Patricia continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Because it's built on fraud and exploitation." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. "Patricia, what are you doing?" John hissed, his face reddening. But she'd already pulled out her phone, connecting it to the venue's audio-visual system, a capability Michelle had confirmed with the technical staff an hour earlier, claiming they wanted to play a surprise video message. "I'm showing our guests who you really are," Patricia replied. The massive screens that were supposed to display romantic photos of the couple instead lit up with bank statements, text messages, and legal documents. Patricia's voice echoed through the sound system as she narrated what each document revealed: the systematic theft of her contributions, the prenuptial agreement designed to strip her of legal recourse, and the text messages between John and Victoria discussing her like a financial resource to be exploited. Victoria stood abruptly, her face contorted with rage. "Turn that off," she commanded, looking desperately at the technical staff. But Michelle had positioned herself near the control booth, and the revelation continued. Guests who moments ago had been ready to celebrate were now staring at the screens in horror, watching as New York's elite society witnessed a methodical dismantling of the Ashford family's carefully constructed reputation. "You signed that agreement willingly," John said desperately, grabbing Patricia's arm. She pulled away, her voice now addressing the crowd directly. "I signed it because I trusted him," she said, "because his mother and their lawyer told me it was standard, that questioning it meant I was only interested in their money." She gestured to the screens, where Victoria's text messages were now displayed. Detailed discussions of how to maximize Patricia's financial contributions while minimizing her legal claims to any shared assets. Among the guests, Patricia could see changing expressions, shock giving way to disgust, particularly among the women. Several of them had daughters, and the predatory nature of what the Ashfords had done was unmistakable. Charles Ashford sat motionless, his face ashen, clearly blindsided by his wife and son's schemes. "This is slander," Victoria shrieked, her cultivated composure completely shattered. "You'll be sued for every penny." She stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd just implied. Patricia smiled coldly. "Every penny I don't have? Because your son already took it all?" The final image appeared on screen, a complete accounting of Patricia's contributions over 18 months, totaling over $200,000, all of it now in investment accounts solely under John's control. The priest had backed away from the altar, looking thoroughly horrified. Guests were standing now, some moving toward the exits, others pulling out their own phones. In the age of social media, Patricia knew this story would be everywhere within hours. The Ashford name, so carefully protected, was being destroyed in real time before their most important social connections. John's face had gone from red to pale, his eyes darting between Patricia and the crowd. "We can fix this," he said desperately, his voice barely audible. "Just turn it off and we'll talk privately." But Patricia was done with private conversations and empty promises. She removed her engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond Victoria had selected, and placed it on the altar. "I'm done being your investment opportunity," Patricia said quietly. She walked down the aisle, her wedding gown rustling against the floor, past guests who parted to let her through. Michelle joined her immediately, and together they exited the Plaza Hotel, leaving behind the wreckage of what was supposed to be the perfect society wedding. The rain had stopped by the time Patricia and Michelle reached the street, but the October air carried a sharp chill that cut through Patricia's wedding gown. Photographers, who'd been positioned to capture the newlyweds' exit instead, got images of a bride fleeing alone, and their cameras clicked frantically. Michelle flagged a taxi, and they climbed in, Patricia's elaborate dress filling most of the back seat. "Where to?" the driver asked, staring at them in his rearview mirror with undisguised curiosity. Patricia gave him the address of Michelle's hotel in Midtown, suddenly exhausted. As they drove through Manhattan's rain-slicked streets, her phone began vibrating continuously. Calls from John, from Victoria, from numbers she didn't recognize. She turned it off. Michelle was scrolling through social media on her own phone, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "It's everywhere," she reported. Multiple guests posted about it. "Society wedding ends in scandal. Ashford family exposed as frauds, and someone even live-streamed parts of your presentation." She showed Patricia a video clip that had already garnered 50,000 views. Victoria screaming while bank statements flashed on the screens behind her. At the hotel, they navigated the lobby with Patricia still in her wedding gown, drawing stares from other guests. In Michelle's room, Patricia finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed, the adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation now draining away. "What happens now?" Michelle asked gently, bringing her a glass of water. "Legal warfare, probably," Patricia replied. She'd already consulted with her own attorney that morning after receiving the anonymous email, a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud and had been horrified by what the prenuptial agreement actually contained. "Margaret Chen, the lawyer who handled my prenup, has a duty to ensure I understood what I was signing. If Victoria instructed her to deliberately obscure the implications, that's legal malpractice." More immediately concerning were the financial realities. Patricia had $70,000 in her checking account, money she'd kept separate on her lawyer's advice that morning, but recovering the $200,000 John had taken would require litigation. She'd also just walked away from her job at an elite marketing firm, a position Victoria had helped her obtain, and would certainly now work to sabotage. Michelle sat beside her, practical as always. "You can stay with me in Chicago until this settles," she offered. "My firm is always looking for good marketing consultants." It was a lifeline, and Patricia grasped it gratefully. New York had never really been home. It had been a performance, a role she'd played to make herself acceptable to people who would never truly accept her. Her phone, which she'd turned back on, rang again. This time it was her father. "Are you safe?" he asked immediately, his voice tight with worry. Patricia assured him she was fine, that Michelle was with her. "I never liked him," her father admitted. "Too smooth, too practiced. And his mother looked at you like you were a problem to be managed. Patricia wished she'd listened to his instincts. By evening, the full scope of the scandal's spread became clear. News outlets were covering it, not the major networks yet, but society blogs, financial news sites focusing on the wealthy family's exposure, and legal commentators discussing the prenuptial agreement's questionable ethics. Patricia's anonymous email source reached out again, this time identifying herself. Rebecca Hartley, John's ex-girlfriend from 3 years earlier. They agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from Manhattan's social scene. Rebecca was elegant and clearly from the same social class as the Ashfords, but her eyes held a hardness born from experience. "He did something similar to me," she explained. Not quite as elaborate, but Victoria was already coaching him on how to benefit financially from relationships while protecting the family assets. Rebecca had left before any marriage discussion, but she'd been tracking John's subsequent relationships, waiting for an opportunity to expose the pattern. "Why help me?" Patricia asked. Rebecca's smile was bitter. "Because Victoria destroyed my reputation when I left John," she said. "She told everyone I was unstable, gold-digging, that I'd tried to trap her son." The lies had cost Rebecca friendships, social standing, and eventually drove her to relocate to California. "When I heard John was getting married again, I started investigating. The prenup was public record once filed, and I have friends who still work in their financial circles. Together, they represented a damaging testimony to the Ashford family's methods." Rebecca had already been contacted by a journalist from a major newspaper working on a larger story about wealthy families exploiting marriage laws to protect and grow their assets. "They want to interview you," Rebecca told Patricia. "It would mean more publicity, more exposure, but also potentially legal protection. Public scrutiny might prevent the Ashfords from burying the case in expensive litigation." Patricia agreed, understanding that silence would only allow Victoria and John to control the narrative. She'd spent 18 months being controlled, being shaped into something acceptable to them. That version of herself had died in the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom. What emerged now was someone harder, wiser, and absolutely unwilling to be anyone's victim. 3 months later, Patricia stood in a Chicago courtroom, watching as the judge reviewed the settlement agreement her lawyers had negotiated with the Ashfords. Winter had arrived early, and through the windows she could see snow falling over the city that had become her refuge. The case had never gone to full trial. The public exposure had been too damaging, and Charles Ashford had finally intervened, horrified by what his wife and son had done. The settlement was comprehensive. Patricia would receive not only the $200,000 John had taken, but an additional $300,000 in damages. Margaret Chen, the lawyer who'd facilitated the fraudulent prenup, had been reported to the state bar and was facing her own professional reckoning. Most satisfyingly, the settlement included a clause prohibiting the Ashfords from making any public statements about Patricia or the case. Victoria had fought the settlement viciously, but Charles had finally asserted himself, threatening divorce if she didn't agree. The scandal had cost him business relationships and board positions, his reputation as an honorable businessman tarnished by his association with his wife's schemes. John, meanwhile, had been quietly removed from the family company, his father finally recognizing the liability he represented. Outside the courthouse, Michelle waited with coffee and a genuine smile. "How does it feel?" she asked, as they walked toward Patricia's new apartment in Lincoln Park. Patricia considered the question carefully. The money helped, certainly, but the real victory was more profound. She'd refused to be silenced, refused to accept the role of victim, and in doing so had exposed a system that relied on people being too ashamed or intimidated to fight back. The newspaper article Rebecca had contributed to had been published a month after the wedding, sparking wider conversations about prenuptial agreements, financial abuse in wealthy families, and the power dynamics that allowed it to continue. Patricia had been interviewed for follow-up pieces, her story becoming emblematic of a larger problem. Several other women had come forward with similar experiences, and there was now legislative discussion about requiring independent legal counsel for all prenuptial agreements. Patricia's career had rebounded quickly. Michelle's firm in Chicago had hired her, and her expertise in crisis management, learned through very personal experience, made her invaluable. She'd also started consulting with a non-profit that helped women escape financially abusive relationships, translating her marketing skills into fundraising and awareness campaigns. The work was meaningful in ways her previous career had never been. John had attempted to contact her several times, messages that swung between apologies and accusations. She'd blocked his number after the settlement was finalized, uninterested in whatever narrative he was constructing to absolve himself. Victoria's silence was more ominous. Patricia knew the older woman was not someone who forgave or forgot, but with the legal settlement and the public record established, there was little Victoria could do beyond nurture her resentment. The anonymous support Patricia received was unexpected and touching. Women she'd never met sent messages thanking her for speaking out, sharing their own stories of financial manipulation in relationships. Several had been able to negotiate better prenuptial terms or leave exploitative situations because Patricia's case had given them language and legal precedents to work with. This, more than the financial settlement, felt like justice. On a cold December evening, Patricia met Rebecca for dinner at a restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. They'd become unlikely friends, bonded by their shared experience with the Ashford family. Rebecca had returned from California, her own reputation rehabilitated as the truth about Victoria's smear campaign emerged. "To surviving," Rebecca toasted, raising her wine glass. "To more than surviving," Patricia corrected, clinking glasses. "To refusing to let them win." They talked about their futures. Rebecca was considering writing a book about financial abuse in elite families, while Patricia was being courted by a national women's advocacy organization to lead their economic justice campaign. Both had transformed their trauma into purpose. Later, alone in her apartment, Patricia looked at the single photograph she'd kept from her time with John, a picture from their second date when she'd still believed in the possibility of genuine connection. She studied her own face in the image, seeing the hope and trust that had made her vulnerable to exploitation. Then she deleted it, the digital erasure feeling like a final release. The story could have ended differently. She could have signed the final papers after the wedding, could have spent years in a marriage built on deception before the inevitable collapse. She could have remained silent when she discovered the truth, too ashamed or intimidated to speak. That she'd found the courage to act, to expose them publicly despite the personal cost, still surprised her sometimes. But courage, she'd learned, wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision that something else mattered more than fear. Her dignity had mattered more, her self-respect, her refusal to be reduced to a resource to be harvested and discarded. The Ashfords had taught her many things, though not the lessons they'd intended. They'd taught her that wealth without integrity was hollow, that social position without character was worthless, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply tell the truth. Spring would come eventually, melting Chicago's winter into new growth. Patricia was ready for it, ready for whatever came next. The woman who'd stood trembling in a Plaza Hotel suite was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own strength. And if the Ashfords thought about her at all now, she hoped it was with the uncomfortable knowledge that they'd underestimated her completely. That mistake, at least, they would never make again.